I'm Hazel, 28 years old, and I never thought my decision to move back home would turn into such a nightmare. When my San Francisco apartment rent skyrocketed, living with my parents seemed like the perfect solution. I agreed to pay them $1,800 monthly for my childhood bedroom, thinking I was finally saving for my future home. Then, without warning, they moved my brother Jake, his wife Tara, and their screaming toddler into my room. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from, hit that like and subscribe button, and stick around to see how I handled this family betrayal. When I first accepted the position at Tech Future, a promising startup in San Francisco developing AI solutions for healthcare, I was ecstatic. 4 years of computer science at Berkeley had finally paid off. The salary was competitive, especially for someone just 3 years into their career, and I loved the dynamic atmosphere of innovation and possibility that surrounded me daily. My coworkers became friends, and I felt like I was finally building the life I had always dreamed about. Then came the housing crisis. San Francisco's rental market has always been brutal, but when my landlord announced a 30% increase on my already expensive one-bedroom apartment in the Mission District, I knew I was in trouble. $1,800 becoming $2,300 overnight was simply impossible to manage even with my decent tech salary. The timing couldn't have been worse. I had just started contributing significantly to my retirement fund and was finally building savings for an eventual down payment on a place of my own. After weeks of unsuccessful apartment hunting and crashing on my friend Margot's couch, I reluctantly called my parents. They lived in the same house I grew up in, a modest 4-bedroom in South San Francisco. It wasn't too far from my office, and with the increasing flexibility of remote work, it seemed like a reasonable temporary solution. "Honey, of course you can move back home," my mom Susan had said, her voice warm and welcoming. "We've missed having you around anyway." My dad Frank was equally enthusiastic. "Your old room is just sitting there empty most of the time. It would be good to put it to use." Their immediate acceptance was such a relief. I had always had a good relationship with my parents. They were supportive throughout college, attended every important event in my life, and always made it clear they were proud of me. We had our occasional disagreements, as all families do, but nothing serious enough to cause lasting damage. When I brought up the idea of paying them rent, it was my suggestion initially. I was 28 years old, financially independent, and the idea of living rent-free with my parents felt uncomfortable. I suggested $1,200 a month, figuring it was a significant contribution while still allowing me to save. "Actually," my dad had said, looking somewhat uncomfortable, "we were thinking more like $1,800 would be fair. It's what you'd pay for a room in a shared house around here anyway." I was surprised at the amount. It seemed steep for a bedroom in my parents' house, but still less than what I'd been paying for my own apartment. And they were family after all. I trusted them completely. "Plus utilities," my mom added. "Just your share, of course." I agreed, thinking it was still a good deal that would help me save enough for a down payment within a year or two. The first weekend after moving back, I spent over $5,000 renovating my childhood bedroom. The room needed a serious update from its high school appearance, with band posters still taped to the walls, and a twin bed that wasn't going to cut it for an adult. I purchased a comfortable queen bed, a proper desk for working remotely, ergonomic chair, and upgraded the lighting. I even paid to have additional electrical outlets installed to support my work equipment. My parents seemed impressed and grateful for the improvements, commenting that I was increasing the home's value. "This looks amazing, Hazel," my mom had said, surveying the transformed space. "You've always had a good eye for design." During those first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. I enjoyed my mom's cooking again, saved money on groceries, and even appreciated the company after years of living alone. We fell into a comfortable routine. I worked from home 3 days a week and commuted to the office for the other 2. I kept my space clean, contributed to household chores, and even joined my parents for their Sunday tradition of brunch, followed by an afternoon walk along the bay. Looking back now, I should have noticed the early warning signs, the small requests that gradually became expectations. Could I pick up groceries on my way home? Would I mind driving my mom to her doctor's appointment? Could I help my dad figure out his new phone? These were all reasonable asks in isolation, but they quickly multiplied. Soon I was functioning as their personal IT support chauffeur and errand runner, all while paying premium rent for the privilege. Around the third month of this arrangement, my brother Jake called. I had always had a complicated relationship with my older brother. 3 years my senior, Jake had always been my parents' clear favorite. While I was pressured to excel academically and build a stable career, Jake was allowed to drift between jobs, taking months off to find himself or explore his options. Despite his perpetual state of almost success, my parents never failed to sing his praises. "Mom and Dad told me you moved back home, sir," he said during our call. "That's cool. How's that working out?" "It's fine," I replied neutrally. "Just temporary until I can save for a place of my own." "That's smart," he said before launching into his latest career setback. Jake had been working as a sales manager for a mid-sized electronics company, but had recently been let go during company-wide layoffs. His wife Tara was working part-time as a yoga instructor, but with their 2-year-old son Liam, childcare costs were eating most of her income. I made sympathetic noises and offered a few job leads I knew about, which he brushed off as not really his thing. By the end of the call, I felt the familiar frustration that conversations with Jake always seemed to evoke. Little did I know this call was foreshadowing the disaster to come. I'll never forget the day my world turned upside down. I had been away for 3 days at a work conference in Seattle presenting our team's latest project to potential investors. The presentation had gone well, and I was riding high on positive feedback and the possibility of a promotion if the new funding came through. The flight back to San Francisco landed late Thursday evening, and all I wanted was to collapse into my bed and sleep for 10 hours straight. When I unlocked the front door and dragged my suitcase inside, I immediately sensed something was wrong. There were unfamiliar shoes in the entryway, a child's jacket thrown over the banister, and toys scattered across the living room floor. "Mom! Dad!" I called out, confused. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, Hazel, you're back." "How was Seattle?" "Fine," I said automatically, my eyes still scanning the unfamiliar items. "What's going on? Whose stuff is this?" "Oh," she said with a strange little laugh. "I thought your father told you. Jake and Tara are staying with us for a while. They lost their apartment." My stomach dropped. "Okay, but where are they staying?" "The guest room is full of Dad's exercise equipment." My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. "Well, they need more space because of little Liam, so we thought it would be best if they took your room. We've set up a nice space for you in the basement." I stood there, suitcase still in hand, utterly speechless. The basement. Our semi-finished basement was cold, damp, and had only tiny windows near the ceiling that let in minimal light. It was where we stored holiday decorations and old furniture, not a livable space. "You're joking, right?" I finally managed. "Don't be dramatic, Hazel," my mother said, her tone hardening slightly. "It's just temporary until Jake gets back on his feet. They need the space more than you do. You're just one person. They're a family of 3. Before I could respond, Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, his son balanced on his hip. "Hey, sis. Welcome home," he called down as if nothing was wrong. As if he hadn't just taken over the room I was paying $1,800 a month for. "Jake," I said tightly, "what's going on?" He descended the stairs looking annoyingly comfortable in my house, in my space. "Yeah, it's been a rough few weeks. The landlord sold our building and the new owners are renovating everything and doubling the rent. We couldn't find anything affordable on short notice." "So you're staying in my room?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "The room I'm paying rent for." Jake had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Mom and Dad said it would be okay, just until we find a new place. Liam needs a stable environment, you know." My father appeared from the living room then. "Hazel, keep your voice down. The baby just fell asleep." That's when I lost it. "Are you serious right now? I pay $1,800 a month for that room. Dad, I renovated it with my own money. And you just gave it away without even asking me." "We didn't give it away," my father said firmly. "We're helping family in need. I thought you'd understand that." Understand, I was nearly shouting now. Understand being kicked out of the room I pay for. Where is my stuff, by the way? "We moved it downstairs," my mother said. "Everything's fine, nothing got damaged." I pushed past them and headed for the basement door, flipping on the light switch to reveal the horror show below. They had cleared a corner of the basement and set up my bed, desk, and dresser in a haphazard arrangement. The concrete floor was partially covered by an old area rug that smelled faintly of mildew. My clothes were piled in laundry baskets, and my work equipment was stacked precariously on my desk. "This is unacceptable," I said, turning to face my family, who had followed me down. "I pay premium rent for my room upstairs. I can't live down here." "It's only temporary," my mother repeated, as if that made it okay. "How temporary?" I demanded. "And why am I still paying full rent if I'm living in the basement?" My parents exchanged a look. "Well," my father said slowly, "our expenses haven't changed, and we're still providing you with a place to stay." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A place to stay. This is a basement. There's barely any natural light, the Wi-Fi barely reaches down here, and it's freezing. "We'll get you a space heater," my mother offered, as if that solved everything. I turned to Jake. "How much are you paying them for my room?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we're a bit tight right now, so Mom and Dad said we could stay for free until I find a new job." The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. I was paying $1,800 to live in a basement while my brother and his family got my renovated room for free. And my parents, the people I trusted most in the world, thought this was perfectly reasonable. "This isn't right," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "We need to work out a different arrangement. Maybe Jake and his family could take the basement and I keep my room." "That's not possible," my father said firmly. "The basement isn't suitable for a small child." "But it's suitable for me," I shot back. "You're an adult, Hazel. You can adapt," he replied coldly. Tara appeared at the top of the basement stairs, then her expression a mixture of sympathy and entitlement. "We really appreciate you understanding, Hazel. Family has to stick together during tough times." I wanted to scream. They were all acting like I had agreed to this arrangement, like I was willingly making this sacrifice, when in reality they had moved all my belongings without my knowledge or consent while I was away. "I need some time to think," I said, finally, knowing that continuing the argument while I was this upset wouldn't lead anywhere productive. "But this discussion isn't over." That night I lay on my bed in the cold basement, tears streaming down my face. The betrayal cut deep. These were the people who were supposed to love and support me, yet they had no qualms about exploiting me financially while treating me as a second-class family member. The basement ceiling creaked with footsteps above as Jake and his family moved around in what should have been my space. My room. The room I was still paying for. To add insult to injury, the internet connection was indeed spotty in the basement, and I had an important video meeting scheduled for the next morning. How was I supposed to maintain my professional reputation with this substandard setup? My work performance was about to suffer, all because my family decided my needs were less important than my brother's. The first week in the basement was even worse than I had anticipated. The space heater my parents provided barely made a dent in the chill that permeated the concrete walls. Each morning I woke up with a stiff neck and aching back from the dampness that seemed to seep into my bones. The Wi-Fi issue proved to be a major problem for my work calls, with my connection dropping at least twice during every meeting. "Hazel, we're having trouble hearing you again," my team lead would say, frustration evident in her voice. "Can you fix your connection issues before our next meeting?" I had explained my situation to my closest colleague, Danny, who was appropriately outraged on my behalf. "That's insane," she had said when I told her about my new living arrangements. "You're basically subsidizing your brother's family while living in substandard conditions. Why don't you just move out?" It was a logical question, but the answer was complicated. Despite my decent salary, San Francisco's housing market was brutal. Finding an affordable place on short notice would be difficult, and I'd already invested so much in my room upstairs, both financially and emotionally. Plus, a part of me still couldn't believe my parents would continue with this unfair arrangement once they had time to reflect on it. Surely they would come to their senses. Meanwhile, Jake and his family had made themselves completely at home in my renovated room. I could hear Liam running back and forth overhead, his little feet pounding across what used to be my peaceful space. Occasionally, I'd venture upstairs to find toys scattered throughout the house, and Jake lounging on the couch watching sports, looking for all the world like he was on vacation rather than someone urgently seeking employment. The real shock came when I discovered that some of my personal items that had been left in my room were damaged. I had gone upstairs to retrieve a book from my bookshelf, which was still in my old room since there was nowhere to put it in the basement, and found several of my hardcover books with bent pages and crayon marks. My collection of small glass figurines that I'd gathered during my travels was missing a few pieces, and one was chipped. "What happened to my things?" I asked Tara, who was sitting cross-legged on my bed, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up briefly. "Oh, Liam got into them. Sorry about that. We've told him not to touch your stuff." Her casual tone made it clear she didn't consider the damage a big deal, and there was no offer to replace the items. I bit my tongue and left with my book seething inside. That evening, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen as I came upstairs to make dinner. "Jake is really stepping up," my father was saying. "He had 2 job interviews this week." "I'm so proud of how he's handling adversity," my mother agreed. "Always thinking of his family first." "Unlike Hazel," my father added. "I'm disappointed in how selfish she's being about the room situation. We raised her better than that." I froze in the hallway, their words hitting me like physical blows. Selfish, I was paying $1,800 a month to live in a basement while my unemployed brother lived rent-free in my room. How was I the selfish one? I entered the kitchen, making no effort to hide that I had overheard them. "I'm selfish for wanting the room I pay for," I asked, my voice tight with controlled anger. My parents had the decency to look embarrassed at being caught, but my father quickly recovered. "It's not about the money, Hazel. It's about supporting family during difficult times." "Then why am I still paying full rent for a basement room?" "If it's about family supporting family, shouldn't that go both ways?" "Your brother has a child to support," my mother said, as if that explained everything. "And I have a career to maintain, which is becoming increasingly difficult in the basement with unreliable internet and no proper workspace," I countered. The conversation deteriorated from there, with my parents doubling down on their position that I needed to make sacrifices for my brother's family. When I pointed out that I was already making financial sacrifices by subsidizing the household while Jake contributed nothing, my father actually had the audacity to say, "Your brother has always been there for you." I racked my brain trying to remember a single instance where Jake had made any sacrifice for me and came up empty. The tension continued to build as the week progressed. At a family dinner that Sunday, I tried again to address the unfairness of the situation. "I think we need to reconsider the current arrangement," I said as calmly as possible. "If Jake and his family need to stay in my room, my rent should be significantly reduced." My father put down his fork with a clatter. "We've been through this, Hazel. The rent reflects your share of the household expenses, not just your room." "But I'm no longer receiving what I agreed to pay for," I argued. "I've been downgraded to the basement while my brother pays nothing. How is that fair?" "Life isn't fair," my mother said dismissively. "We thought you'd be happy to help family in need." Their gaslighting was infuriating. They were acting as if my completely reasonable objections were evidence of some moral failing on my part rather than a natural response to being treated unfairly. Tara, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "I don't understand why you're making such a big deal about this, Hazel. Your attitude is really creating a negative environment for Liam." I turned to stare at her in disbelief. "My attitude? I came home from a business trip to find all my belongings moved to a basement without my knowledge or consent, and I'm still paying full rent while you live in my room for free. How should my attitude be?" Jake jumped in, then his tone condescending. "Look, sis, we appreciate your help, but the constant complaints aren't helping anyone. We're family, we should support each other." "Support goes both ways," I replied coldly. "And right now it seems like I'm the only one doing any supporting around here." My parents exchanged a look and my father sighed heavily. "Hazel, we raised you better than this. Your brother needs help right now. Why can't you just be the bigger person? Their manipulation was so transparent, yet somehow they had convinced themselves that I was the problem. The worst part was that a small part of me had started to question myself. Was I being unreasonable? Should I just accept this situation for the sake of family harmony? No, I decided firmly. This wasn't right, and no amount of emotional manipulation could change that fact. I went back to the basement that night with a growing determination to stand up for myself one way or another. After 3 weeks of living in the basement, I had reached my breaking point. The situation was affecting every aspect of my life, from my sleep quality to my work performance. My team lead had already commented on my decreased productivity, and I was constantly exhausted from the poor sleeping conditions. But the incident that finally pushed me over the edge happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had a rare day off and had gone out for lunch with my friend Danny to escape the tense atmosphere at home. When I returned, I went upstairs to grab my laptop, which I had left charging in my old room while I was out. What I found made my blood run cold. My $3,000 work computer, which contained all my projects and company data, was covered in crayon scribbles. Liam had apparently gotten hold of it and used it as a coloring book. The keyboard was sticky with what looked like juice, and several keys were loose. I stood there in shock, staring at the ruined laptop. This wasn't just a personal possession, this was my work equipment, essential for my job and containing sensitive company information. The damage could potentially impact my entire career. Jake and Tara were in the room, casually sorting laundry as if nothing was wrong. "What happened to my laptop?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Jake glanced over. "Oh yeah, Liam got to it before we could stop him. Kids, right?" He chuckled, as if it were a minor inconvenience rather than a professional disaster. "This is my work computer," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It has all my projects on it and sensitive company information. This isn't funny, Jake." Tara shrugged. "We told him no, but you know how toddlers are. They don't listen." "So you just let him continue destroying my property? This computer cost $3,000. "It was an accident," Jake said defensively. "It's not like he did it on purpose." "That's not the point," I was shouting now. "The point is that neither of you were watching him properly, and now my work equipment is damaged. You need to take responsibility for this." Jake's expression hardened. "Look, we said we're sorry. What more do you want?" "I want you to pay for the damages," I said firmly. "This is a work computer. If it can't be fixed, I might have to replace it myself." Jake and Tara exchanged glances. "We don't have that kind of money right now," Tara said. "You know our situation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So I'm just supposed to absorb the cost of your child destroying my property, along with paying rent for a room I'm not even using?" My parents, attracted by the raised voices, appeared in the doorway. "What's going on in here?" my father demanded. I showed them the damaged laptop, expecting them to be as appalled as I was. Instead, my mother sighed. "It's just a computer, Hazel. It can be fixed. There's no need to upset everyone over it." "Just a computer?" I repeated incredulously. "This is my livelihood we're talking about." "Family is more important than possessions," my father said sternly. "I'm sure your company has insurance for these things." I was speechless. They were completely dismissing the significance of what had happened. It wasn't just about the monetary value of the laptop, it was about respect for my property and my work. And the casual way they all brushed it off made it clear just how little they valued either. In that moment, something clicked in my mind. This wasn't a temporary arrangement that had gone awry. This was a deliberate pattern of exploitation. I decided to confront them directly. "Did you plan this all along?" I asked, looking from my parents to Jake. "Was the plan always to move Jake in and make me pay for it?" A flash of guilt crossed my mother's face before she composed herself. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," I pressed. "I think you knew Jake was having financial problems long before I came back, and you saw an opportunity when I offered to pay rent. I'm subsidizing his living situation, aren't I?" My father stepped forward, his expression stern. "That's enough, Hazel. Your brother needed help, and we helped him. Yes, we knew he was struggling before you moved back, but that's what family does. We help each other. But it's not mutual, is it? I said quietly. I'm helping everyone, and no one is helping me. Jake needs the help more, my mother said. He has a family to support. And what about my needs? I asked. Don't they matter at all? My father's response chilled me to the bone. You're doing well in your career. You can afford to help. Your brother has always struggled more than you. In that moment, I saw the truth clearly for the first time. My success had become a justification for exploiting me. Because I had worked hard and built a good career, my parents felt entitled to use my resources to support my less responsible brother, and they expected me to accept this arrangement indefinitely without complaint. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Mom, Dad, maybe Hazel has a point about the rent. If she's in the basement now, but my father cut him off. No, the arrangement stays as it is. Hazel agreed to pay that amount to live here, and our expenses haven't changed. I looked at my family, these people who should have loved and supported me, and saw them clearly for perhaps the first time. They weren't going to change. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be resolved with discussion. This was who they were. The final straw came later that day when I was on an important video call with investors. The basement's poor internet connection caused my video to freeze multiple times, and the noise from Liam running and screaming upstairs was clearly audible to everyone on the call. I tried to mute myself when not speaking, but it was still disruptive. After the call ended, my boss sent me a private message. Hazel, is everything okay? You seem stressed, and these technical issues are becoming a problem. Do we need to discuss your work situation? I broke down in tears, the weight of the past weeks finally crashing down on me. My career, which I had worked so hard to build, was now at risk because of my family's exploitation. Something had to change, and it was clear that I was the only one who could make that change happen. The morning after the laptop incident, I took a personal day from work and set in motion a plan to reclaim my dignity and independence. My first stop was to a tenant's rights attorney recommended by Danny. I wasn't sure if I even had a legal case given that this was a family arrangement, but I needed to know my options. The attorney, Maria Gonzalez, listened attentively as I explained my situation. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. While family arrangements can be complicated legally, the fact that you have a clear agreement to pay rent for a specific room and that you've been paying consistently establishes you as a tenant with certain rights, she explained. In California, even without a written lease, you're protected from arbitrary changes to your living conditions. Moving you to a basement without your consent while continuing to charge the same rent could be considered a form of constructive eviction. Hope sparked within me for the first time in weeks. So, I do have legal options. Yes, Maria confirmed. Though I always recommend trying to resolve family disputes amicably first if possible. Have you documented the original agreement and your payments? I had. Being in tech had made me naturally inclined to keep digital records. I had emails discussing the initial arrangement, bank transfer records showing my monthly payments, and even text messages with my parents about the room. Good, Maria said when I told her this. Start gathering all of that documentation. Also take photos of both spaces, the room you agreed to rent and the basement you've been moved to. Document any damage to your belongings as well. She also advised me to research comparable rental rates in the area to demonstrate that $1,800 for a bedroom was already at market rate, making the basement accommodation significantly overpriced. Armed with this information, I spent the afternoon researching local rental options. The market was still tight, but I found several potential shared houses that might work as temporary solutions. I also reached out to friends who might be looking for roommates. That evening, I took a risk that I knew might escalate the situation but felt necessary for my protection. I recorded a conversation with my parents where they openly discussed the financial arrangements, confirming that Jake was paying nothing while I continued to pay full rent for the basement. California is a two-party consent state for recordings, but this was taking place in my home where I had a reasonable expectation of privacy, and I needed evidence of what was happening. Over the next few days, I created a detailed financial analysis showing exactly how much I had been overpaying based on local rates for similar accommodations. I calculated that a basement room like the one I was occupying would typically rent for no more than $600 in our area, meaning I had overpaid by at least $3,600 in the 2 months since being moved downstairs. I also documented all the additional ways I contributed to the household, from groceries to utilities to the home improvements I had made. The picture that emerged was clear. I was essentially subsidizing the entire household while being treated as the least valued member of the family. To protect my job, I arranged to work from Danny's apartment 3 days a week. Her roommate was often away, so she had space for me to set up a temporary workstation with reliable internet. My team lead noticed the improvement in my call quality immediately and seemed relieved that the technical issues were resolved. Throughout this process, I maintained a calm facade at home. I stopped arguing about the unfairness of the situation and instead focused my energy on planning my exit. I reduced my expenses to the bare minimum, putting every spare dollar toward building an emergency fund that would allow me to move out on short notice if necessary. The hardest part was containing my growing resentment toward my family. Each night in the cold basement, listening to the sounds of Jake and his family living comfortably in my room overhead tested my resolve, but I reminded myself that reacting emotionally would only undermine my position. I needed to be strategic. My opportunity came sooner than expected. A former colleague reached out about a housing situation. She and another woman from our industry were looking for a third roommate for a 3-bedroom apartment in Oakland. The commute would be longer, but the rent was reasonable, split 3 ways, and I would have my own private room with a door that locked. I went to see the apartment on a Saturday when I knew my family would be busy with Liam's swimming lessons. The space was bright and clean with hardwood floors and large windows that let in plenty of natural light, a stark contrast to the dark basement I'd been living in. My potential roommates were professional, respectful women who valued cleanliness and quiet. It felt like a sanctuary compared to my current situation. I signed the lease that afternoon, providing proof of income and references. My new roommates were sympathetic to my situation and agreed to keep the arrangement confidential until I was ready to inform my family. With a move-out date secured, I consulted with Maria again to prepare a formal letter terminating my tenancy. She advised me on the specific language to use and the notice period required by law. The letter was respectful but firm, citing the breach of our original agreement as the reason for termination. As I finalized these arrangements, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. I was grieving the loss of the relationship I thought I had with my parents, but I was also reclaiming my power and self-respect. This wasn't just about a room anymore. It was about refusing to be exploited by the people who should have protected me. With my exit strategy in place, I was ready for the confrontation I had been avoiding. I chose a Sunday evening when everyone would be home and Liam would be asleep, minimizing the chance of interruptions. I had my documentation organized in a folder and my termination letter ready. I called a family meeting in the living room, my calm demeanor clearly taking my parents by surprise after weeks of tension. I want to discuss the living arrangements. I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. My father sighed dramatically. Hazel, we've been through this multiple times. Nothing has changed. Actually, I said, sliding the termination letter across the coffee table, everything is about to change. This is my formal notice that I am terminating our rental agreement effective 30 days from today. The room went silent. My mother picked up the letter, her eyes widening as she read the official language. What is this? Why is it so formal? Because our arrangement is a legal one, I explained. I've been paying rent for a specific accommodation which was unilaterally changed without my consent. That constitutes a breach of our agreement. My father's face flushed with anger. You're talking to us like we're landlords, not your parents. You made that choice, I replied calmly. When you decided to charge me market rate rent instead of helping me save for my future, you established a business relationship. When you moved me to the basement without reducing my rent while letting Jake stay for free, you showed me exactly where I stand in this family. Jake, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Wait, you're moving out. Where will you go? I've signed a lease on a new apartment with roommates, I said. I move in at the end of the month. My mother looked genuinely shocked. But we're family. You can't just leave like this. Family supports each other, I said, opening my folder of documentation. Let me show you what support actually looks like. And I laid out my financial analysis, showing them exactly how much I had been contributing compared to Jake. I showed them local rental listings demonstrating that I had been significantly overpaying for the basement. I showed them photos of my damaged belongings and my work laptop. This isn't support, I said firmly. This is exploitation. You've been using my success as a justification to subsidize Jake's irresponsibility. Jake stood up, his face red. That's not fair. I've been looking for work. Have you? I challenged him. Because Mom mentioned last week that you turned down a job offer because the salary was too low. Meanwhile, I'm paying 3 times what the basement is worth to subsidize your free stay in my room. My father tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I've consulted with a tenant's rights attorney, and I have grounds to demand a refund of the rent I've overpaid since being moved to the basement. That's $3,600, and that got their attention. My father's expression shifted from anger to concern. You spoke to an attorney about your own family. I had to protect myself when it became clear no one else would, I replied. I'm not actually going to sue my own parents, but I want you to understand the seriousness of what's happened here. You took advantage of me because you knew I could afford it, and because you thought I would just accept it. My mother started to cry, a tactic she had often used to end difficult conversations. I can't believe you would do this to us, after everything we've done for you. I refused to be manipulated. What exactly have you done for me lately? Mom made me pay premium rent to live in a basement. Dismissed my concerns about my damaged property. Prioritized Jake's comfort over my ability to do my job. The room fell silent except for my mother's sniffles. I could see the realization dawning on my father's face that this wasn't a negotiation. I wasn't asking for their permission or approval. I was informing them of a decision already made. What do you want from us? He finally asked, his voice subdued. I want you to acknowledge the unfairness of this situation, I said. I want Jake to start paying rent for the room he's occupying or to move to the basement himself. And I want to be treated with the same respect and consideration you give him. Jake stood up, pacing the room. We can't afford to pay what you were paying Hazel. You know that. I do know that, I agreed. Which is why I suggested from the beginning that you should take the basement where the rent would be lower, or that my rent should be reduced when I was moved down there. But neither of you were willing to consider those options. So you're just leaving? Jake demanded, suddenly angry. Abandoning the family when we need help. I looked him directly in the eyes. Where was this family loyalty when my belongings were being damaged, when I was trying to work from a cold basement with unreliable internet? When my career was at risk, the help only seems to flow in one direction in this family. My parents exchanged glances, and I could see the calculation happening. They were realizing they were about to lose the $1,800 a month I had been providing. Their reliable income source was walking away. Maybe we could work something out, my father said slowly. We could reduce your rent if you stay in the basement. I almost laughed at the transparency of the offer. No, Dad, I've signed a lease on an apartment where I'll have a proper room, reliable internet, and roommates who respect my space and property. The decision is made. But we're your parents, my mother protested weakly. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant everything, I said, my voice finally cracking with emotion. That's why this hurts so much. You chose to treat me as a tenant when it came to collecting rent, but expected me to act like a selfless daughter when it came to making sacrifices. You can't have it both ways. The conversation continued in circles with my parents, alternating between anger, guilt trips, and desperate counteroffers. Jake oscillated between defensiveness and resentment, clearly worried about what my departure would mean for his free living arrangement. Through it all, I maintained my position. I would be moving out in 30 days. I would pay prorated rent for that period at a rate appropriate for basement accommodations, which I calculated at $600. After that, they would need to find another source of income if they wanted to maintain their current lifestyle. By the end of the evening, a cold silence had descended on the house. My parents retreated to their bedroom without resolving anything, and Jake left with Tara to get some air. And I returned to the basement feeling oddly light despite the tension. For the first time in months, I was taking control of my situation instead of letting others decide my fate. The next 2 weeks were uncomfortable. My parents vacillated between ignoring me completely and making occasional attempts to persuade me to stay. Jake avoided me entirely, clearly blaming me for disrupting his comfortable arrangement. Tara made a few awkward attempts at reconciliation, but I could tell she was mainly concerned about their living situation once I was gone. On moving day, my new roommates came with a rented truck to help me transport my belongings. My parents watched from the window but didn't come outside to help or say goodbye. Jake was conspicuously absent. Only Liam, innocent of the adult conflicts, waved cheerfully from the front door as I drove away. The first night in my new apartment felt both strange and liberating. After months in the damp basement, the bright, clean room with its large window seemed almost too good to be true. My new roommates, Alicia and Jennifer, gave me space to settle in, but also invited me to join them for a welcome dinner. Their warm, respectful treatment highlighted just how dysfunctional my family situation had become. To new beginnings, Alicia toasted, raising her glass of wine. And to standing up for yourself, Jennifer added with a knowing smile. I slept deeply that night, free from the sound of footsteps overhead and the persistent chill of the basement. When I woke, I felt rested in a way I hadn't in months. The first 3 months after moving out, I had no contact with my family. I blocked their numbers temporarily, needing space to heal and reflect. It was difficult, especially during holidays and family birthdays, but I knew maintaining boundaries was essential for my well-being. During this time, I threw myself into building a new support network. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with and made an effort to deepen my relationships with colleagues. I joined a hiking group that met on weekends, finding solace in nature and the company of people who knew nothing of my family drama. Professionally, I flourished. Without the constant stress and poor living conditions, my performance at work improved dramatically. 6 months after moving out, I received a promotion to project lead with a significant salary increase and more responsibility. Your work has been exceptional these past few months, my boss told me during my review. Whatever was going on before seems to be resolved, and it shows in your performance. I began working with a therapist to process the feelings of betrayal and to understand the family dynamics that had led to such an unhealthy situation. Dr. Lawson helped me recognize patterns of favoritism and emotional manipulation that had existed in my family long before the housing incident. Your parents created a system where Jake was rewarded for needing help while you were penalized for being independent, she explained during one session. It's a common dynamic in families with one child who struggles and another who succeeds. This insight helped me make sense of my parents' behavior, though it didn't excuse it. Understanding that their actions reflected long-established patterns rather than a sudden change in how they felt about me was both painful and clarifying. 7 months after I moved out, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. I almost declined the call, but something made me answer. Hazel. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Please don't hang up. I didn't speak, waiting to hear why she had contacted me. We miss you, she said after a moment. The house feels empty without you. I wondered if what they really missed was my financial contribution, but I kept that thought to myself. I needed space to heal, I said finally. I understand, she replied, though I wasn't sure she did. Things have been difficult since you left. I learned that my parents had struggled financially without my rent payments. They had eventually asked Jake to contribute something toward expenses, which had created tension. Jake had finally found a job, though, at a lower salary than his previous position and was now looking for his own place. Your father would never admit it, my mother confided, but I think he realizes now that we treated you unfairly. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. I agreed to meet her for coffee the following weekend in a public place where I could leave if things became uncomfortable. Our reunion was awkward but civil. My mother looked older somehow, the lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered. She made several attempts to reminisce about happier times, perhaps trying to reestablish our connection through shared memories. I kept the conversation focused on the present. I told her about my promotion, my new apartment, the hiking group I joined. I didn't volunteer information about my finances or living expenses, maintaining those boundaries carefully. "We would love to see your new place sometime," she suggested tentatively. I wasn't ready for that. "Maybe someday," I said noncommittally, "but I'm still establishing my independence and I need that space to be just mine for now." She seemed disappointed but didn't push. Before we parted, she handed me a card. Inside was a brief note from my father, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that things had been handled poorly and an expression of hope that we could rebuild our relationship over time. Over the next few months, I cautiously allowed my parents back into my life, but on very different terms than before. We met for occasional meals in restaurants, neutral territory, where everyone remained on their best behavior. I declined invitations to holiday gatherings, opting instead to spend those days with friends who had become my chosen family. Jake reached out, eventually, his message more direct than our parents had been. "I screwed up," he wrote. "I took advantage of the situation and didn't consider how it affected you. I'm sorry." His apology felt genuine, and I learned that becoming the sole focus of our parents' attention after I left had been its own kind of burden. Without me there to absorb some of their expectations and demands, he had felt the full weight of their involvement in his life. "I never realized how much pressure you were under all the time," he admitted when we met for lunch. "They expected you to solve everyone's problems while criticizing everything you did." His insight surprised me. Perhaps losing the financial cushion I had unwittingly provided had forced him to confront reality in ways he'd been able to avoid before. A year after moving out, I felt whole again. The anger and hurt had faded, though not disappeared entirely. I had established clear boundaries with my family and was vigilant about maintaining them. I visited my parents' home occasionally, but never stayed overnight. I made it clear that financial discussions were off limits, and any attempts to criticize my choices or compare me to my brother would result in me leaving immediately. These terms might have seemed harsh to outsiders, but they were necessary for my protection. My parents had shown me who they were during that difficult time, and while I could forgive, I would not forget. The most valuable lesson from this painful experience was learning the difference between genuine family support and exploitation disguised as help. True family loyalty isn't measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice, but by the mutual respect and consideration shown in times of need. I also learned that standing up for myself wasn't selfish, despite what my parents had claimed. Self-respect isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Without it, we become easy targets for those who would take advantage of our desire to please and belong. Today, my relationship with my family continues to evolve. There are good days when we connect authentically, and difficult days when old patterns threaten to resurface. But I no longer question my worth or my right to be treated with respect. I've created a life surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, being taken advantage of by those who should support you, know that you deserve better. Family obligations should never come at the cost of your dignity and well-being. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away and build something healthier for yourself. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about navigating complex family dynamics and standing up for yourself. Remember, you are not alone in these struggles and your feelings are valid. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to honor your own worth, whatever that might look like in your life.